This has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
AP News. Good morning, I'm Ed Donahue. 3 hospitals say Israeli strikes killed at least 58 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip overnight into today. The AP's Charles De Ledesma has the story.
The overnight strikes hit multiple homes in the middle of the night, killing men, women and children as they slept. Hours later, the Israeli military restored a blockade on northern Gaza, including Gaza City, that it had maintained for most of the war. It warned residents against using the main highway to enter or leave the north and said only passage to the south would be allowed on the coastal road. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been returning to what remains of their homes in the north after a ceasefire took hold in January. Israel then resumed heavy strikes across Gaza on Tuesday, shattering the truce that had facilitated the release of more than 24 hostages. I'm Charles De Ledesma.
President Trump threatened Yemen's Houthi rebels that they'll be completely annihilated as American airstrikes pounded locations under their control while further pressing the group's main benefactor, Iran. President Trump is expected to sign an executive order calling for the shutdown of the Department of Education. Sarah Newman was laid off at the department.
There's always room for improvement, but I don't think that's what this is about. If it were about that, we wouldn't be destroying the system and then seeing where the dust settles. You know, you would be working, I think, hand in hand with the bureaucrats to figure out where, there is room for improvement.
President Trump has called the Education Department wasteful and polluted by liberal ideology. Dismantling it would need an act of Congress. Aaron Grunches, an Arizona man who kidnapped and murdered his girlfriend's ex-husband, was executed by lethal injection, the second of 4 prisoners scheduled to be put to death this week in the U.S. North Carolina lawmakers agreed to spend $524 million on needs from Hurricane Helene's historic flooding 6 months ago. This is AP News. There are new chances to win a Latin Grammy.
This year's 26th edition of the Latin Grammys will inaugurate the addition of new categories, including Best Music for Visual Media. Creators who are of Ibero-American descent or feature Latin rhythms have a shot at walking away with this award during November's ceremony in Miami. Projects can range from original music in movies and TV shows to video games and other forms of visual media. A Best Roots Song category will also go to songwriters with unpublished work that honors the cultures and traditions of the Hispanic American community in various languages. I'm Marcela Sanchez.
For the 8th year in a row, Finland has been named the happiest country in the world, according to the World Happiness Report 2025. The Wellberg Research Center at the University of Oxford says Denmark, Iceland, and Sweden followed Finland on the list. The U.S. dropped to its lowest ever position, 24 on the happiness list. I'm Ed Donahue, AP News.
This is 8:20 a.m. WCPT Willow Springs and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. Few spotty snow showers here early today. Otherwise, skies will become mostly sunny. Highs around 40 degrees, and it'll be breezy. Northwest winds of 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusting as high as 40. Tonight, mostly clear, low near 30. By Friday, increasing cloud cover, high 57 degrees. Saturday, mostly sunny skies with a high around 44. That's your latest Chicago weather update.
Currently, it's 33.
Style at every turn and power for every drive. Your new Porsche awaits at the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park. Stop in today to browse and test drive the latest models, including the all-new 2025 Porsche Macan 4 Electric with its impressive 402 horsepower. And right now, qualifying leasees can receive up to $12,500 in electric vehicle rebates. Find style, power, and your new Porsche today. Shop electric Porsche models and more by visiting the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park or PorscheExchange.com.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Welcome to Choose Views with Richard Chew. Get ready to dive into a world of insightful conversations and thought-provoking discussions.
As progressives, our job is to have an all-inclusive, full-on assault with all of our players.
A show that will focus on moving our political, social, economic, gender, and cultural conversation forward.
And all of our players means all of our players.
It's Choose Views. And now, here's your host, Richard Chew.
Good Thursday morning, progressives, and welcome to the March 20th. Yes, it is. 2025 edition of Choose Views, 773-763-9278. Facebook Live, TuneIn Radio, and, of course, YouTube and iHeartRadio as well. Email me at richard@WCPT820.com. And catch me on Substack. Just dropped a new post yesterday, and we'll probably have another one happening by the end of the week. Catch all of our shows, of course, by subscribing to our WCPT podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. There you can get the short versions and the long versions of Choose Views. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. Driving It Home with Patty Vasquez. The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath. And Out Chicago, of course, in our other shows and interviews. Check out our heartlandsignal.com digital platform because there is lots and lots of good stuff there. And most definitely make sure you're checking out Joan today, 2 to 5 p.m. She's going to have her wonderful guest, Patty, 5 to 7, with her guest, driving you home as always. And today we're going to be pretty busy with our show here with our guest. At 6:30, we will have our good friend Kurt Hurner from Akron and a really super special guest, Dr. Roseann Canfora. She will be talking with us about college protest, and she's got a unique perspective, very, very unique, one that you guys probably haven't had anybody in your life to tell you about. So she's going to be a very special guest this morning and talking about where we are today with college protest, education, and such. And then we spoke yesterday with a gentleman named Eamon Whalen, who is going to be talking with us about, we'll call it I guess we'll just call it male masculinity. And I put those two words together by design. But we're going to be talking a little bit about this whole thing of are men okay? And tying it to where we are with our current elected officials, particularly the dude that's in the White House. And then in the 7:30 hour, we'll be talking with military veteran Mike Williams, who's got an interesting perspective on what's happening with our veterans and specifically something that he's been working with for years when it comes to veterans and money, veterans and debt. So looking forward to talking to all three of our wonderful guests this morning, or certainly talking to two of them, and then our recorded interview with Eamon Whalen. So stay tuned today. This is going to be some exciting conversation, and I'm sure you guys will want to be plugged into this. If you are in the Chicago metropolitan area, I would highly advise that if you're commuting in any way, if you're driving yourself, if you have to take an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi, on this first day of spring of 2025, we got some snowy, mix, wet, stuff. And so I would say that even though it is also known as the vernal equinox, for you astrology and astronomy nerds, today being the first day of spring, that rebirth, if you will, it's snowing here in Chicago. And whatever way you're commuting to work or wherever you're going, just be careful and give yourself some extra time. I left 15 minutes earlier today just to make sure that I got here. So please, y'all, be safe. Give yourself some extra time. You're going to have to, don't be this person. Okay, please don't be this person. Please don't be that person that runs out the door, slips and falls, then makes everything worse. Okay, that's person one, Henry. Person two, please don't be that person that your car is parked outside and you get up and you go out, and just because you're running behind for whatever reason, that you just get in, turn on the engine, hit the windshield wipers and clean off the front window and not clean off the side windows in the rear. Please don't be that person. Give yourself a little extra time. If you don't have a snow scraper or snow brush in your car, then take the broom from the closet in your house and clean your car off, and then just throw it in the trunk or the back seat. Don't be that person. It's not safe and it's not cool. So there. And then the other person that you don't want to be is please don't be that person that goes out this morning without the proper footing on. It's too doggone cold and wet and nasty. Put some boots on, or put some sneakers on. At least you'll have a little bit better traction. Okay, that's me being Uncle Richard. What can I tell you? Sometimes I get that way, but I want you guys to be safe. Seriously, no matter what your age is. If you're a 20-something or all the way up to a 70 or 80-something and you're out in this stuff today, be careful. Extra scarf isn't going to hurt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just letting you know. And it shouldn't surprise you. I've probably done this at least once a week the last, year plus time. Tickets, our May 3rd event, are now on sale for our May 3rd anniversary broadcast at Max and Benny's Restaurant, Deli, and Bakery up in Northbrook. Hal Sparks, Joan Esposito, Scott Duff, Patty Vasquez, and I will be there broadcasting live from 11 until 3 p.m. Special guests, of course, will be with us. Learn more and get your tickets by visiting heartlandsignal.com/anniversary. Tickets are $20 each, but you better hurry up because they're sneaking away. So make your way there. And also, if you got somebody you want to bring, hey, that's another way to kind of introduce yourself to the WCPT family. All right, Henry, I think we'll probably make our way over to our Choose Views News this morning to bring everybody up to speed on things that are happening. Artificial intelligence literacy is topping the list of skills in terms of skills on the rise. A data-backed ranking of the 15 skills that professionals are prioritizing and that companies are hiring for and hiring with right now, with 70% of the skills used in most jobs expected to change by 2030. The list identifies the emerging areas professionals should invest in to get ahead. The rankings highlight technical skills such as LLM development and application, as well as soft skills like adaptability. One skill that everybody in the workplace that's coming into the workplace should be working on is communication with your coworkers. Okay? That's an oldie but moldy, but that's no matter how technically savvy you are, if you can't communicate with people, that's going to be a problem. So make sure you're doing a little bit of both. The Fed is holding rates steady. Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged as expected and reaffirmed its forecast of 2 cuts this year. The central bank yesterday maintained its key rate in a range of 4.25 to 4.5% after lowering it 3 times last year amid slowing inflation. Looming tariffs, however, may reignite price growth and impede economic expansion. I wanted to slow down and say that. Impede economic expansion because the Orange Menace needs to have a trade war. The Fed sliced its forecast for domestic growth, product growth, to 1.7% from a December projection of 2.1%. That's on Trump, y'all. Trump and his minion. And of course, the folks that voted for, I want my eggs to be lower. Well, that's not going to happen for a while. Morgan Stanley is looking to cut 2,000 jobs and planned layoff of employees this month in a cost-saving initiative that comes amid minimal attrition in the workforce. How about lowering the compensation of folks at the top, and if you're going to cut, and keep people employed and just lower the compensation for those who are in stupid income levels? That's just me. Raise their wages for people and see what happens to the economy. About 80,000 workers made, according to this projection, the cuts are expected to affect various areas of operations, but exclude its 15,000 financial advisors, and a small number will be attributed to AI. Purdue Pharma, OxyContin manufacturer, filed a new Chapter 11 bankruptcy plan Tuesday that would give creditors at least $7.4 billion to compensate victims of the opioid crisis. The major step, quote, follows the Supreme Court's rejection last year of a $6 billion bankruptcy pact that shielded the Sackler family, Purdue's owners, from liability in future opioid claims. Under the new terms, creditors who opt out of the settlement will not get paid, but can pursue lawsuits essentially on their own. And then last but not least, the tennis industry is coming into light. The Professional Tennis Players Association has sued the sport's main governing bodies for acting like a, quote, cartel that keeps wages low and constrains both playing opportunities and rival games. The lawsuit, filed in New York, London, and Brussels, seeks to upend the, quote, fundamental structure of one of the most popular global sports. The Athletic writes recently that both the men's ATP and the women's WTA tours rejected claims, calling claims by the association founded by Grand Slam champion Novak Djokovic as flat out misguided. So, talk to Billie Jean King. She might have a few things to say about compensation and activity in the sport of tennis, particularly for women. All right, folks, let's take a quick break. The number is 773-763-9278. This is Choose Views, and we'll be right back.
With MedGuard Alert, you're never alone. You can connect with medical professionals anywhere, anytime. And now MedGuard is introducing our exclusive new Care Watch. If you need help quickly, use it from anywhere to contact medical professionals. No cell phone required. The Care Watch is not only a life-saving medical alert device, it's a revolutionary health monitoring system that checks your blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, and much more. And here's the best part. If you have Medicaid, you may qualify to get your Care Watch for free. The Care Watch is only available through MedGuard Alert. Call us right now. We have monitoring programs starting as low as $1 a day. The call is free, activation is free, shipping is free, and no contract is required. Remember, with Medicaid, you may qualify to get your Care Watch for free. Call us to get your Care Watch right now.
800-741-5819. 800-741-5819. 800-741-5819. That's 800-741-5819.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
It's Choose View with Richard Chew on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Welcome back to Choose Views. Progressive, glad you're with us this morning, guys. It's one of those days here in Chicago, but it kind of, you know how I'm looking at it, Henry? If this is our last hurrah of snow on the first day of spring, I can get with that, because then that means we can put snow off, hopefully, until Christmas Eve later this year. I got criticized online, Henry. You remember this. As someone, I said that you and I were talking about not having to shovel rain. And so a couple people were like, yeah, but Richard, we're not talking about climate change enough because we don't have. And I was like, yeah, I get that. We all know, we're progressives are pretty big advocates of the climate conversation. And when we had Cheryl on, talking about the misuse of land and water and clean water. That's an issue around climate because we poison our water, we poison our climate. But anyhow, this hopefully will be the last hurrah of snow until December 24th. How about that? But my man Brett, who is on the road, sent me a text this morning saying, "Hey Richard, it's 52 degrees right now." Where he is on the West Coast in California. So all I'll say to you is be careful out there, my man, and we will thumb our noses up at you with your 52 degrees temperature. So let's grab a quick call since we have such a busy morning. Let's go to Jim here in Chicago. Good morning, Jim, and welcome to Choose Views.
Yeah, welcome to the Ice Page, Rich.
That's right.
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking about? If you were, let's say you put an 8-hour day at a Republican think tank, and how do you think the day would go?
Not much going on.
No, but think of you've got Prager University, you've got Hillsdale College, it's the Cato Institute, you've got some high-paid employees at these think tanks, and their job is to annihilate the memory of the Democratic Party and push the one-party rule in the United States.
Yeah.
So they got fortunate in 2016 because they knew they were underwater, and I'm sure in my mind the Russians helped them in those swing states. They knew obviously that those swing states that they could peel off, because Hillary got 5 million more votes than Trump did.
Yeah.
So if they could peel off those, just like you would if you were in a war, if you were planning if you were gaming a war, and they did that successfully, and they put this lunatic in, and now this aging lunatic pulls off another upset. You know, where Kamala was ahead 3 points. I mean, that's why these silly. They'll say, "Oh, how many people believe in this? How many believe?" It's all baloney, because she had a 3-point lead in all the swing states until the last day, and then suddenly they disappeared. You could draw your own.
Part of that, though, I mean, and I'm saying you're right to the extent that we put an idiot, a craven one, in the White House. But, there is more and more conversation that's being had, and I know that Greg Palast doesn't necessarily agree with there was any shenanigans that went on. He's thinking more and focuses more on the voter suppression part of this, election. But at the end of the day, this is the thing I'll say. We know there's voter suppression, that we know that there's a strong amount of speculation and maybe evidence that's real that there were shenanigans that went on. And let's talk about it. And more people who are credible are talking about it. I don't have details on it. I have information that I have tried to vet as best possible before talking about it here on the air. But I do believe, as
yeah, go ahead. I was going to say that think of what the Democratic Party did for civil rights. Yeah. I had nuns and priests that I knew that marched with Martin Luther King for civil rights. And who delivered civil rights? The Democratic Party. And why did they do it? Because they knew that they might get some reliable voters. But I don't even think their motive was that. Their motive was to be the United States, to have a democracy here.
Yeah.
And
right now,
just one of the things.
Go ahead,
one
Jim.
of the things. But I think about the accomplishments of the Democratic Party.
I know.
You've got civil rights, the war on poverty through the 60s. You've got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. And Jim, thank you so much for the call this morning.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you.
I know you got a busy show. Thanks,
Jim. Jim's been around for a minute, and I appreciate his frustration because he's seen some of this stuff up close and personal, which is one of the things that we're going to cover with our first guest, Dr. Canfora, this morning. She's seen some things that none of y'all want to see, and I'm going to talk to her about what she's seen and where we may be headed. But Jim is right. The Democratic Party, with all of its ills, has been the party that's developed the things. And I'm so tired of hearing people say, Lincoln freed the slaves. Nah, that ain't what happened. Do your research. It's a nice Republican talking point, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, in terms of modern living, it's the Democratic Party that has done and pushed forward the legislation that Jim just talked about. So with all the ills of the Democratic Party, I get it. Listen, I pay very close attention to it, and I'm one that's often yelling from the top of the wherever to say, do more, do more, do more, fight harder, fight harder, fight harder. I'll give you an example that is just current. I don't want to miss this because I know there's so much we have to cover. This is where people who say that Trump is doing things good for the good of the country, and did you all know? Did you hear yesterday that he signed another one of his executive orders saying that segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts? Okay? Let that sink in for a minute. If you are of color, if you are a woman, if you are, frankly, someone that's immigrated to this country in the last 75 years, let that sink in for a minute. Okay? This person has signed an executive order saying that essentially contractors that are working with the federal government can discriminate. I'm not going to give it the soft version. He said, yeah, go ahead. Segregation is fancy words for racism. So this is where leadership comes in and has to step up and call this out. And these are things that are flying under the radar with the mainstream media, which is why as much as I criticize and push at the same time our Democratic leaders to do more, faster, harder, louder, I also talk about the fact that the mainstream media is just letting a lot of this stuff fly under the radar. My family fought for the right for all of us to have a combined, collective, non-discriminatory society. And this fool has said that federal contractors no longer have to, segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts. So that means that they can tell the Black, Hispanic, Asian, Muslim, frankly, women, white women, by the way, that you can't be in here. That's the literal words of the law. That's what this could lead to. So, just wanted to let you know that the Democratic Party, with its ills, is a party that's fought against these things for decades. And leadership right now is a critically important point. And I think it's I'm going to make a little bit of a pivot. There's a clip I wanted to play for you guys, but with our time, I don't want to crash upon. I don't know if we have the time to put that one in, Henry. Before we probably should sit tight. Yeah. Okay. Cool. But what I want to do is there's a really, really wonderful op-ed that I want you guys to take a peek at. Read it actually in its entirety, and then send it to those who are just trying to get their head wrapped around some of the things that are going on. And it's written by, our good partner and ally, Kristen Crowell. She'll probably be with us next week. And it's an op-ed that's titled, "Americans Know a Bad Deal When They See It. Now's the time to offer an alternative vision." And that's the headline. I want you guys to read it. And it gets into a couple of different areas, but it specifically talks about the Musk-Trump partnership, if you will, and how what the destruction is really going to look like. So I think you can appreciate this this particular writing by Kristen. So make your way over to heartlandsignal.com to check this out. I think you'll be pleased. Leadership. That's where we are right now. The lack of it on our side is what so many folks are screaming for, rightfully so. And as I said a moment ago, the Democratic Party has had its ills. At the same time, it is the party that I feel is the one that is that can't cave. And since I'm using those words, Henry, let's go ahead and play that clip that we have, and then we will hit a break, and then we've got our two guests waiting for us when we come back. Let's go to that clip. Sonny? Yeah.
Democratic voters say 2-1. They want party leaders to fight rather than compromise, even at the risk of not getting things done. And I think that's what we're seeing. Yes, you want people to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights to protest and to get into the streets, get out there and say, this is what we want. Mm-hmm. But we know that this administration is not playing by the rules. They're certainly not playing by the Constitution, and people are now being arrested for exercising their constitutional rights. Mm-hmm. So you do need a leader, but you need a leader with fight. I've said it over and over again. This is not about being a resistance party. That's very passive. This is about being an opposition party, which is an action that's very, very active. Mm-hmm. And when you look at leaders that it seems that people are supporting, you're looking at the Jasmine Crockett's, who doesn't care, who's going to fight for you. You're looking at the Al Green with his cane, who's saying, my constituents need Medicaid. Mm-hmm. You're looking at that. You're looking at, I would say, an AOC. Her name keeps on coming up because she's out there every single day saying, this is what we need to do. So what I want to see is I want to see somebody meet energy with energy. I want to see a Democratic leader that doesn't capitulate, that doesn't make deals with the other side when the other side is interested in making deals. It's their way or the highway. Let's see a leader that's willing to fight.
Yeah, and that's where we are. And when we come back from the break, we're going to have a wonderful guest with us this morning that knows what it's about to fight real time. literally, and she'll bring some very important conversation to you guys. The number is 773-763-9278. This is Choose Views, and we'll be right back.
This is a WCPT moment in labor. In the 1830s in Lowell, Massachusetts, during the rise of the textile industry, factories were hiring large groups of women ranging in ages 18 to 35 to work at their mills. The workdays were 13 hours long and had poor working conditions. By 1834, the textile market was sluggish. In response, the workers' wages were reduced by 12.5%. One of the workers, Julia Wilson, tried to organize the women to get their wages back, only to be terminated abruptly. Wilson signaled the women to strike or turn out. Over 800 women marched and signed a petition saying we will not go back into the mills to work unless our wages are continued. Ultimately, the strike failed, but they learned from their mistake and successfully battled back a rent increase on their boarding houses 2 years later. By January 1845, about a dozen of the Lowell female textile workers came together to form the Lowell Female Labor Reform Association. This would become the first organized union of women workers in American history. This has been a WCPT Moment in Labor. We're working for your rights.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. Few spotty snow showers here early today. Otherwise, skies will become mostly sunny. Highs around 40 degrees, and it'll be breezy. Northwest winds of 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusting as high as 40. Tonight, mostly clear, low near 30. By Friday, increasing cloud cover, high 57 degrees. Saturday, mostly sunny skies with a high around 44. That's your latest Chicago weather update.
Currently, it's 34.
You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
It's Choose Views with Richard Chu on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, Progressive, welcome back to Choose Views, 773-763-9278. So keeping the train moving along, guys. Some of us are old enough to remember the 60s, as it were, and the early 70s, and a lot that was happening. Vietnam War, protests, civil unrest, Dr. King, Malcolm, JFK, Bobby, Medgar. There was a lot happening. It was hot in the country. It was hot. There were protests taking place all over the country, but particularly on college campuses. And this morning, we're going to take a little bit of time in this segment to talk about some history, but also talk about where we are and potentially what our future can look like. You heard Sunny Hassan talk about leadership and protest and the importance of us getting out and having our voices be heard. And that's happening right now. It happened last year during the election, the campaign, I should say, and maybe went in a direction that a lot of people ended up not getting what they thought they were going to get. That being said, with us this morning is our good friend Kurt Hurner from Akron, Ohio. And along with Kurt is Dr. Chick Canfora. And she's made it clear to me, don't call me by my other name, call me by Chick. So good morning, Kurt. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Richard, and good morning, Dr. Canfora. It's very nice to have you with us.
Dr. Canfora, good to be with you this morning. Thank you for being on our show. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yes, I do go by both names, but at Kent, I'm known as Chick Canfora, and whenever I'm talking about Kent State, I'd like to be known by the name that I used when I enrolled at Kent State in 1968 and that I still use today as a professional in residence and a journalism professor there. So it's just to avoid confusion about who I am.
and it's stuck for all these years, so I guess that's a good thing. Well, Dr. Canfora, I am really thankful that you were able to be with us this morning. And in this environment that we're in right now, I think that you have a particularly unique, special, unfortunately tragic understanding of what happens in protests and when things go awry. Tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little bit about what your current work is when it comes to the School of Journalism. But what I'd like to let everybody know is Dr. Canfora was literally at Kent State during one of the most influential, if not the most influential, college protests that we've ever had in America. And you all are very familiar with the Kent State shooting. And Dr. Canfora, Why don't you take a little bit of time and tell us a little bit about that experience at that time, and also I want to kind of merge that with where we are today with some of the recent events that have taken place with college campus protesting and protesting in general.
Sure. A lot of people were surprised when I talked with them about the fact that I wasn't an activist when I came to Kent State in 1968. I was like a lot of students today and a lot of students back then who just go on to college and our only goal is to graduate, pursue our dreams, and get the job, that we're hoping for. But when I came to Kent State in 1968, everywhere I walked on campus, I saw student activists talking about issues that were affecting our generation. They were talking about racial discrimination. They were talking about social injustice. They were talking about the fact that at 18 we didn't have the right to vote, but at 18 our friends were being sent off to Vietnam, and they didn't have the right to vote for the people sending them there. And it wasn't until my own friends started to die in that war or came home scarred by that war, or when my brothers got their draft notices, and 2 of my 3 brothers were having to go to Southeast Asia to fight in a war neither of them believed in. That was when I stopped throwing the anti-war leaflets away. That's when I stopped to listen to what the student activists were saying, to learn about the war, and to realize that I could do what they were doing, use my voice to play a part in ending that war. And, today when I talk with student activists, it wasn't sitting around talking about U.S. imperialism that brought me to the cause. It wasn't, deep-rooted kinds of political philosophy. It was truly that I knew something was wrong in this world, and I wanted to join the people who were doing something to make it right. And that's why we need a big tent today, so that we're not fighting each other about our tactics or our factional differences, but instead there are some common things we must unite around today. And that is what made a difference in 1970. Some students, if you know the history of May 4th, when Nixon announced the invasion of Cambodia on April 30th, it was at a time when we were expecting the war to be wound down. He had promised to wind down the war. Now he was escalating it into Cambodia. We had just attended the funeral of my brother's best friend from childhood 10 days before that. And so our feelings were raw, and we were still reeling from the fall at the moratorium when there were tens of thousands of students in the streets of Washington, and our president announced that he was going to watch a football game that day. Like, he just wasn't hearing us. So it was not surprising that in the spring of 1970, student actions became more militant to get the attention of the president, who just wouldn't listen to us.
It's become I guess, for a lot of people who may not have been around, it's become a situation where we forget our history, and now we're, there are advocates who don't want to talk about history, don't want to teach history, that we forget that we are susceptible to repeating some of the same ills. And, my show is about talking about all these issues and then finding what the connection points are, because ultimately I believe that they're all connected if we take the time to do that. And one of the things that you said earlier is about common cause, common things that we fight for. What are some of the things that, when you're talking with your students in the journalism department, as a professor of that craft, what do you try to articulate to your students about the things that are important at the end of the things that are connective topics?
Well, just in my media ethics class this week, one of our students in that is the head of Black United Students, and they're very active on our campus right now against Senate Bill 1 in Ohio that is truly just stripping any mention of diversity, equity, or inclusion. And in fact, I don't even like using the word DEI anymore, because just like critical race theory, it's just become a buzzword for the right to just demonize anything that is associated with race, that is associated with the social injustice that is racially motivated, and discrimination that extends not just, to race, but also our LGBTQ plus community, and other disenfranchised, marginalized groups on campus. Our students are very, very aware of why that's important, because for many of them, just like for me, when I arrived at Kent in 1968, it was my first opportunity to meet people who were raised differently. I grew up in Barberton, Ohio, where everyone was a Catholic or a Protestant. I had never met a Jewish person until my roommate was Jewish. I'd never talked with people who had different religions and different cultures and different backgrounds. And, college campuses, not surprisingly, have been a place not only where students begin to see past the nose on our faces, where we see the world as a much bigger place, where knowing and appreciating our differences is vital in a democracy, and where we can speak out against injustice, the injustice we see around us in our communities. And so I'm really proud of our students that they had a walkout yesterday in opposition to Senate Bill 1. I actually taught right before spring break my chapter on diversity. It's titled Diversity, and DEI is permeated throughout every chapter of that book, because when we're talking about media ethics, so much of what media does stereotypes so many in our population that are not your typical male, white, patriarchal image. And my students are recognizing with Senate Bill 1, I might not be able to use that textbook next year. I might not be able to teach the lessons I'm teaching now. And they're offended by that. They're offended when anybody says, you can't know this, you can't talk about this, and they're mad. And I see so much of myself in them, because, as I said, when it hits you personally, when you start to see your friends discriminated against or attacked, you get mad. And you want to do something about it.
So you just saw this, and based on when you got to Kent State and based on when you hit the earth, you've been around to see a lot of social change. And I talked about this as part of our intro, that it was hot in the 60s. It was hot in the 70s, certainly the early part of the 70s, and you witnessed this right up front, face forward. And you saw bills, federal legislation, not executive orders, that were passed to quote unquote try to even the playing field, or certainly take the proverbial foot off the necks of certain members of our society. And I presume you just saw that Donald Trump just signed another executive order that segregated facilities are no longer explicitly banned in federal contracts. You watched the prior to the legislation passed by Congress, signed by Lyndon Johnson. And now you've seen this. Now you're seeing a stroke of a pen, whether it be mechanical or otherwise, take that away. What does that mean to someone like you, who grew up watching one side, the change, and then a prosperous society benefit from the lack of these segregated facilities?
Well, my mother just passed away. It'll be a year ago in June, and she was 98. And there are so many times that I'm so glad she didn't live to see what we're seeing now. She and my father both served in World War II. And my father was very active in the labor movement. All of us were active in the civil rights movement. I'm very proud of Kent State's history, of how students at Kent, even prior to May 4th, 1970, when we were so instrumental in helping to end the Vietnam War. Students at Kent State were in Selma marching and protesting against segregated schools and segregated housing. They came back to Kent and shut down the corner lunch bar in Kent in protest of its segregated policies that wouldn't serve black students and families. Students at Kent State protested segregated student housing on the campus successfully. And so, I and my parents saw so much change over the course of time, but it's now being rolled back, not just for women's rights and civil rights. To see them chipping away at this daily, it's exhausting, it's infuriating, and it's getting noticed. And it's about time. So, it's heartbreaking, but it's motivating.
It's heartbreaking.
Dr. Canfora, I wanted to ask real quick. Though, Richard. Dr. Canfora, how is it going to be, say, in Kent or Portage County as a whole with a sheriff like Bruce Thurkowski running around with his little army of people?
Or any other of the leaders, or the not leaders, but the elected officials, to Kurt's point, in the state of Ohio that are rolling back, just readily rolling back so much legislation that historically Ohio was a state that I always remember as a state that got it and was a forward-moving state. What changed? And I asked from your perspective, because you were born there, you've lived there, you've taught there. What changed in your opinion?
Well, I don't like to think of Ohio as the red state or the purple state. I really like to think of Ohio as Ohio was the state that delivered the victory to Barack Obama. That was with real hard work and boots on the ground, but also with voting maps that weren't so hideously gerrymandered. We haven't had a Republican governor for like 20 years. And, the voices of students today, the voices of activists who fight for social justice today are never going to be heard if our students, our citizens, don't use the megaphone that we fought so hard for in 1970, and that was to secure the right to vote at 18. It's still disappointing how few students are registered to vote, or how few went out to vote, or how few paid attention to the issues or to the people that they were electing to office that are always going to vote against their best interest. And so, we talk a lot with students not only about registering to vote, because if they're angry about Senate Bill 1, they have a chance to reverse what's happening in Ohio by electing Democrats who do vote on the side of students when it comes to a living wage, when it comes to relief from crushing student loan debt, when it comes to issues around gun control. These are things that our students all have in common that they care about. When it comes to a safe and healthy planet to live on and other injustices that affect their lives and their future, students are potentially one of the largest body of voters. But they don't educate themselves about candidates. And worse, they don't register and they don't vote. And so, they can't blame Congress for not listening if they're not voting out them. Yeah, money talks, and there's going to be, there's a lot of money coming into Ohio to fund, those that are taking Ohio and the rest of the country backward. But as long as we still have the right to vote, and as long as they don't take over the Federal Election Commission and they don't rig future elections, those midterms are very, very important, and those elections in the State House and in the governor's offices are critical for stopping what's happening in Ohio. Because if we could deliver Ohio for Barack Obama, we can roll back some of these attacks on our democracy.
Yeah, like Kurt was saying twice. Kurt and I talk about this a lot, and you just said something that I want to ask a question that's not meant to be loaded, but you said that students can't blame Congress. So I'm going to position this in a kind of a different way. Is there any validity in your experience to this statement that the Democrats aren't fighting hard enough? There's not enough exciting candidates. There's not enough candidates that are out there presenting this changed message. What's your take on that in contrast, or not contrast, but in comparison to what you just said about students can't blame? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think they just can't stop at blaming. I blame Congress for a lot of what is happening. I mean, they're just sitting on their hands and watching our democracy erode. And that's on both sides. I can't even believe, what some of the Democrats are doing. But I've long felt that our Democratic Party, particularly in Ohio, is extremely weak. They are on the take as much as anybody else. I mean, Greg Palast's book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, is legitimate. Yeah. Until we get money out of politics, it's going to be very, very difficult because they are all on the take. They love their golden parachutes coming out of Congress. They serve their own best interests. From the time they take their seat, they're already worried about being primaried or being voted out or not getting enough money to be reelected. They're just not thinking about us. Yeah. But, you have people like Sherrod Brown who does think about us, and he just got voted out because the Democratic Party didn't put enough money into Ohio to protect him, and the Democratic Party, I believe, failed Sherrod Brown, who was one of our only best hopes. I hope he runs for governor in Ohio, to be honest with you.
I was hoping he'd run against
Ramaswamy.
I was hoping he'd run against former Lieutenant Governor Houston next year and take over J.D. Vance's seat so we can get him back into the Senate.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll be down there campaigning for him if he does. I mean, that was a tremendous loss, and I think our party failed us. I mean, I feel very strongly that some of the new emerging voices, people that looked at Bernie and AOC as fringe elements in our democracy or in our Democratic Party, but their voices are strong now, and people are realizing that they warned us, they warned the party, they warned the rest of us that we were not.
So I have a question pertaining to your field, Dr. Canfora. Would it be wise if, say, like a Sherrod Brown running for the U.S. Senate or maybe a Tim Ryan running for governor or whatever, or whomever the Democratic candidate in Ohio may be for either of those seats, would it be wise if they were to run on maybe bringing back the fairness doctrine and maybe running to vote to repeal the Telecommunications Act of 1996 to maybe get some fairness back into our media again?
Well, that's a soft spot for all of us in the field of journalism. We lost the fairness doctrine during the Reagan years. That's how long ago. I mean, the Walter Cronkites that inspired us to protest the war are gone. I mean, he was the most trusted man in America. You could turn on the CBS Evening News and see political commentator as the title, but the most knowledgeable, the most experienced people talking about the war. And you could leave every newscast, hearing both sides of an issue and then, using your own moral code and values to determine who you believe and where your values align with them. People today are just so confused. They get into their filter bubbles. They go into these rabbit holes. Those who watch OAN and Fox News, a lot of them are my friends. They're college graduates. They're smart people. I can't even have conversations with them. They just start spouting these talking points, and I just, grab my head and say, please turn the channel. So in my, and really I can't even, I don't even know where to begin because they're just parroting what they hear. And worse, when I try to reason with them or present evidence of what they're hearing is absolute baloney, it's like they just shake their head like, no, don't confuse me with the facts. I've got my mind made up, and that is the power of propaganda. And no one knows that better than Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who are fighting so hard for media control right now. And so, yes, I can't imagine if someone doesn't educate the public about the fairness doctrine, take us back to the days when Walter Cronkite was hearing things from our federal government that were in conflict with what he was hearing from our soldiers, and he left his news desk and put on a flak jacket and a helmet and went to Southeast Asia and came back and said, we're going to lose this war. We're not doing anything of value there.
Yeah, it's
be like J.D. Vance, who said, well, I saw it on TV when President Zelensky asked him about his experience with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That was one of those moments where I think anybody watching that wanted to throw something at the television screen or throw their phone across the room. Dr. Canfora, and first of all, Kurt, thanks for helping get Dr. Canfora on this morning.
You're welcome.
You've been absolutely fantastic. I just sat here. I put my hand underneath my chin so I could just, like I was sitting in one of your classes, listening to you profess to us your life experience, your observations, and the things that you believe that we have to do. But it seems like the one word that's constant in you and has been in you for a long, long time is fight. And that is to fight. We have to fight for the things that we say we want. And if we believe in those things, we have to fight real hard to get them. So I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this morning and to help us have a different perspective, but one that is necessary in the environment that we're currently in. I know you're super busy, and I know that you've got a lot going on, but thank you for taking some time this morning, Dr. Canfora, and I look forward to having you back as this is an ongoing conversation about how we must fight.
Well, thank you for having me on this morning, and thank you for raising awareness of what's going on today and how it relates to what we experienced 50 years ago.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Canfora, for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Canfora.
And Kurt, as always, thank you for being with us this morning. Both of you have a safe day. The weather that we got here in Chicago might be coming your way there in Ohio, so brace yourself.
Well, it's raining here in Akron. What's it up over in Portage County, Dr. Canfora?
What's happening there? You guys catch this weather yet? It's pretty dismal.
Yeah. It's pretty dreary out there. But it was a nice sunny day when our students did a walkout yesterday on campus. So
there you go. Well, that's a good.
And I was just up there. Last Friday. I took the day off and I went up there and I ate lunch at Mike's place with my wife and we walked around the campus. It was such a beautiful day last Friday to walk around campus.
But here we go for the first day of spring. But listen to both of you guys again. Thank you so much. I won't keep you any longer. Have a great day. Stay safe and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Canfora.
Thanks, Dr. Canfora. So listen, I could have talked to her for a long time. She's the same age as my sister Linda, and they went through this. I sat at the knees of my sister and listened and watched her fight. And I remember when Roe v. Wade, when Roe was struck down, I remember I reached out to my sister and I said, I just need to send you some love because I watched her fight for that. As a little boy, I watched my sister fight for it. I watched my sister and my brother-in-law, her husband, and so many members of my family who fought in the Vietnam War and were participants in the support mechanisms. Dr. Canfora was there. There's a great clip and a great video. If you guys would like it, I'll get it to you of a short segment, short movie that she and others who were on campus were literally in the quad during the shootings at Kent State. It's pretty powerful, and I can get it to you guys if you would like to watch it. But what resonates for me with her and her experience and what she's doing now is she said it clearly that our voices matter. Our voices have to be out there. And yes, she was rightfully and accurately so in criticizing our current leadership. And she was this is what people, I believe, want to hear, Henry. They want to hear us do walk and chew gum. We can be critical of the people that we have in leadership roles, but it's also our job to get behind them and push them. Criticism just to be critical doesn't lead to anything. It just sounds like you're using the B word. And I won't say that. I know I can, but I'm not going to say that. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, Henry, for me to criticize you without a solution or here's where we go is not good. It's not productive. So we can criticize our leaders and still be behind them. We just have to push them. And that's why I was so passionate, somewhat emotional last week when we were able to have U.S. Representative Nikki Brzezinski on with us to say to her, listen, y'all got to do more. We got you. But y'all got to do a little bit more. That's what we elected you for. And I think she gets it. In fact, I know she does. So when we are critical of our leaders, we're going to say it different ways. My man Kurt Mullet from Hoosier Blue 63 is going to say it one way. I'm going to say it a different way. But the goal is to get our leaders to work harder and to fight harder. And when a person like Dr. Canfora can be right there, have been right there, and still be in this fight all these years later, Henry. I mean, that's what we want to see. So when we talk about younger voices, she's got a young voice in this fight, and she was born in 1950. So it's not chronological age we're talking about. We're talking about energy. We're talking about passion. We're talking about forward thinking and movement. That's what we're talking about when we say that our leadership has to have that. You know, we have to do what Sonny Hostin said. It's not, you know, we can't go along and get along. We got to fight. So thanks to Dr. Canfora for being with us, and thanks to Kurt Hurner for helping us get her on the show today. We're going to take a quick break. The number is 773-763-9278. This is Choose Views, and we'll be right back.
Question: where were you on May 3rd, 2005? If you were listening to the radio, you may have heard the first day on the air for WCPT. On Saturday, May 3rd, WCPT is celebrating 20 years on the air with a big live broadcast from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be at Max and Benny's restaurant in Northbrook, and WCPT listeners can attend this special 4-hour broadcast. Al Sparks will kick off the celebration with the WCPT broadcast team. Richard Chu, Joan Esposito, Patty Vasquez, and Scott Duff, as well as surprise guests from our 20-year history. It's the WCPT 20th anniversary, and you're invited to come and celebrate with us. To register for this special event, go to WCPT.com and click on the WCPT anniversary banner. Seating is limited and will sell out quickly. Go to WCPT.com today to register. See you on Saturday, May 3rd from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Max and Benny's in Northbrook.
So spread the word that WCPT is just great.
Hair Volume is the best-selling hair tablet in the world and one of many award-winning natural hair products from New Nordic. Purchase at newnordicusa.com or CVS.
AP News. Good morning, I'm Ed Donahue. Today, President Trump is expected to sign an executive order to shut down the Department of Education. The AP's Ben Thomas has the story.
Trump's derided the agency as wasteful and polluted by liberal ideology, but dismantling it will not likely be easy, as reflected in this exchange between Senator Bill Cassidy and Education Secretary Linda McMahon during her confirmation hearing.
Do you agree that since the department was created by Congress, it would need an act of Congress to actually close the Department of Education?
And certainly President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress. We'd like to do this right.
Still, the administration has already cut the agency's workforce in half, and McMahon laid out this vision in that hearing.
To return education to the states, I believe, as he does, that the best education is closest to the child.
Ben Thomas, Washington.
Local health officials say Israeli strikes killed at least 85 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip. Ala Abdul Halal lost his family. He says they were sitting in the tent and a missile fell on them. He and his mother were martyred. They left me. My wife was pregnant. The fetus was also martyred. The Israeli military says it struck militant targets. Later that day, it said projectiles fired from Gaza set off air raid sirens in central Israel. It appears to be the first rocket attack out of Gaza since Israel ended the ceasefire with a surprise bombardment of the territory on Tuesday. Senior officers from countries across Europe and beyond are meeting at a military headquarters near London to flesh out plans for an international peacekeeping force for Ukraine, as details of a partial ceasefire are being worked out. A Georgetown scholar in Washington, D.C. has been detained by immigration officials. Badr Khan Suri, a postdoctoral scholar, is accused of spreading Hamas propaganda and promoting anti-Semitism on social media. This is AP News. An experimental treatment appears to delay Alzheimer's symptoms in some people genetically destined to get the disease. Jake Heinrich in New York is 50 years old.
My father was 50 or 51 when he passed away. With Alzheimer's, my brother was 49.
New research shows Heinrich has been treated for more than a decade and remains symptom-free. He's been taking 2 drugs that modestly slow worsening of early-stage Alzheimer's by clearing the brain of one of its hallmarks. There are fears future funding could be blocked by Trump administration delays. What would that mean for Heinrich?
I will lapse into symptoms, Alzheimer's symptoms, and we'll be back to where we were 10 years ago and 20 years ago when I lost my brother and I lost my father.
For Heinrich's wife,
this trial has given us life.
Rachel Chapkin says they need the National Institutes of Health not to be politicized. I'm Ed Donahue, AP News.
This is 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. A few spotty snow showers here early today. Otherwise, skies will become mostly sunny. Highs around 40 degrees, and it'll be breezy. Northwest winds of 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusting as high as 40. Tonight, mostly clear, low near 30. By Friday, increasing cloud cover, high 57 degrees. Saturday, mostly sunny skies with a high around 44. That's your latest Chicago weather update.
Currently, it's 34.
When you're hiring, have you ever felt like you're missing out on meeting great candidates? Well, they're not hard to find when you go to ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter helps 10 million people with their job search every day. People who are actively looking for jobs like yours. So it's easy to find the right person fast. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/free. That's ZipRecruiter.com/free.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Welcome back to Choose Views with Richard Chu on WCPT 820 AM, where facts matter. Take it away, Richard.
Hey, guys. Welcome back to Choose Views, 773-763-9278. Once again, a shout-out to our good friend Kurt Hurner in Akron, Ohio. Kurt's a special dude when it comes to what's happening in the state of Ohio. He loves his state, and he loves all that it's represented. So I like to give him his props and the contributions that he makes to the show, whether he's calling in or sending me information and all the rest, and his help to get Dr. Canfora on at this critical time of college protesting and protesting in general is important. So shout out to you, Kurt, and as well as to Dr. Canfora for being with us this morning. She's special. She's very, very special in the work that she's done and her history. We want to have you guys be part of what's happening. May 3rd event. Tickets are now on sale again for our May 3rd anniversary broadcast at Max and Benny's Restaurant, Deli, and Bakery in Northbrook. Hal Sparks, Joan Esposito, Scott Duff, Patty Vasquez, and I will be there broadcasting live from 11 a.m. until 3 p.m. A special guest. Learn more and get your tickets by visiting heartlandsignal.com/anniversary. Tickets are $20 each, so make sure you get them because they're slipping out the door quickly. I had an opportunity to speak with a gentleman who recently wrote an article that was in The Nation. In fact, the cover story. And the title of the article is, Are Men Okay? Now, in this conversation you'll hear, we talk a lot about what's happening with male masculinity. We cover a few different things, but the one piece that I really wanted to be able to talk with Eamon about is where we go and how we try to see some change in this sort of toxic masculinity environment that we've been in for a while. And it was great talking with him, and we've got a really good piece. Again, check out his article in the Nation. It's called Are Men Okay? So Henry has got this all queued up and ready to go. So we had the opportunity to talk with a gentleman who has become really, really a heavy-duty freelance journalist with The Nation, contributor. His name is Eamon Whalen. And I just want to tell you guys, this is a person that's had the courage to ask a tough question. And that question is, are men okay? And with us this morning is Eamon Whalen. And I wanted to welcome you to Choose Views. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So most recently, and this is an April cover story, if I'm correct, in The Nation, and that's this piece that you put together, this article, Are Men Okay? But before you tell us about that, tell us a little bit about you, your background, and just so let our listeners know a little bit more about the work that you've done and a little bit about your career.
Yeah, I am a freelance journalist currently. I most recently worked for Mother Jones magazine. Before that, I was freelancing for places like The Nation. I wrote a cover story for them in 2021. And my work, I kind of I broadly cover politics, but the way I sort of found myself to this particular topic was in 2023. I wrote a story for Mother Jones magazine on their website, a feature story about the rise of these so-called masculinity influencers, people like Andrew Tate, and how they were, becoming very popular and sort of exploiting the kind of insecurities and grievances of young men and leading them astray on the internet. And that is how I became aware of the work of Richard Reeves, who I profiled in this Nation story, sort of as an entry point into this conversation about the state of American men. So I sort of come at this from a political political angle, and one of sort of young men being radicalized on the internet. But that and Reeves takes on part of that, but that's not his whole project. So
this is the question that I just will dive in and ask you, Eamon. What, in your definition, what is masculinity in and of itself? How do you define that?
That's a good question. It's a big question. I think what I would say probably is that masculinity is everything that the male sex performs to sort of make a male sex a man, if that makes sense to you, like sort of getting into kind of sociology here, but sort of everything besides your sort of, anatomy and in your body that kind of makes us recognize what a man is, certain behaviors and such. But I also do think that writing this story, I've kind of realized how sort of slippery a concept it is and kind of contested. And I think that there are lots of different forms of masculinity. And it is a pretty tricky concept and one that's tricky to write about. So I don't know if I have the best answer besides that. I do think it is a sort of, cultural performance, but that's not to say that doesn't mean that it's real and takes on real social meaning in our society and politics.
So here's one for you. There's this, there's always this push between the straight community and the non-straight community. And I say that non-straight because I'm talking about this from the male perspective. So in your observation, your mind, and your experience, can a man that's not straight be considered masculine?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's kind of, in the eye of the beholder and sort of what we define as masculinity. I think a lot of people who would define something as more of a, traditional or conventional. I think that's been a sort of long time, both struggle for gay men to be sort of accepted that they are men, and being attracted to women isn't what solely makes you a man, and that you can be a man that is attracted to other men romantically and sexually. And I also think that the fear of being identified as gay or not straight, as you say, often is a vulnerability that a lot of men carry and kind of hide away, in a way of sort of protecting a sort of their idea of what makes them a real man. And I think a lot of men, the fear of being seen as gay actually sort of cripples their expression of masculinity and makes it very kind of narrowly expressed because they are scared of being seen as not straight. And I think that is a serious issue that someone like the developmental psychologist Niobe Way, who I interview in my story, who is a critic, but a measured critic of Richard Reeves, the guy I profile in my story, talks about this. She has spoke to and worked with and studied with young boys and men for 40 years, and that is something that often comes up in her work, is that young boys are able to form very intimate, deep friendships with each other at young ages. And then as they sort of get older and are socialized, they start to turn inward and start to see kind of emotional intimacy with other men as being gay. And it starts to, not just gay, but unmanly. And it starts to really, negatively affect their social lives and how they sort of move through the world after that. So, I think it is a tough question. People say it's like masculinity is easily, difficult. It's hard to win and easily lost, something like that. And I think that's pretty true.
So there's so many pieces to this. And that's why I wanted to start by asking that question, because let's just face it, a lot of people want to say that, the masculine men can't be gay. And I think that forces us to redefine, or maybe not redefine, but expand what the definition of masculinity can look like. Because, I've had this phrase in my brain for years. There's a lot of gay men that I know that can fight their behinds off. In other words, they're not the pushover, stereotypical observation of a gay man. There's some guys who are not gay that couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag. So I think that sometimes masculinity has to do with the profile, the visual, the toughness, the tough guy. I mean, by comparison, let's take a broader sense. Donald Trump is probably viewed by a lot of the Andrew Tate-esque brainwashed incels as masculine, and Tim Walz is not. But if I'm going to go to battle, I would rather have Tim Walz with me in battle than Donald Trump. And so Governor Walz was unfortunately by some, what I would say, non-strong men like Jesse Waters is referred to as being effeminate. But I'll take the strength of character and the strength of position of a Tim Walz, Governor Walz, over a Donald Trump. And I think that sometimes that's where we get this skewed. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at least jump in on that and tell me how you see that.
Yeah, it's close to home. I'm actually born and raised in Minneapolis, so familiar with Tim Walz. But yeah, I think this is actually a great example. The contrast that you raised is a great example of what I write about in my book, based on the writings of a very famous feminist writer named Susan Faludi, who famously wrote a book about the backlash to feminism. But then her next book after that was Stiff, The Betrayal of the American Man. And she writes about how a sort of a model of sort of idealized manhood in America shifted over the course of the 20th century to one that is a lot less like Tim Walz and a lot more like Donald Trump, a lot less based on a sort of a manhood that, showed men that they're part of a larger social system that is based on kind of loyalty and service and being useful to your community, and not being the sort of Lone Ranger, tough guy that sort of nobody knows and is kind of on his own. That sort of idea of masculinity, and really based on, violence and the sort of looming threat of violence, that was that came about in the sort of age of mass media and consumerism, and Susan Faludi calls that form of masculinity ornamental. So it's just a sort of a performance game. It's not based on anything real, and it's a sort of like I think she calls it like, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV, and that's sort of like Trump. He performs this sort of mafia boss, corporate executive in the boardroom. And so I actually think that, Trump, his brand of manliness it's very kind of, as much as a lot of people like to say it's an old fashioned kind of retrograde misogyny. It's also very new, because it's very against this old kind of more service oriented. He's very vain. He's very image obsessed. He's, all the sort of quote unquote old school values that, that we like to think about that, real men carry, like integrity and honor and honesty. None of the words I'm using really describe Donald Trump, at least people that are evaluating him objectively. So I do think, and so you can contrast that with someone like Tim Walz, who actually the character, the guy I'm profiling in my story was very enthusiastic about Tim Walz because he is very worried about the loss of male grade school teachers and what that's doing for young boys in school. And so, a Tim Walz, who is, a teacher, a coach, someone who, the memes about him was that he would come fix your car on the side of the road, someone who is, reminds us of this sort of, at least the kind of, positive aspects of masculinity in men that we sort of kind of remember and nostalgically. And, and then that also translates to some of his, policies that he advocates for, more kind of a broader social welfare state and, more public goods and things of that nature. So, I think there's an interesting contrast to be made there.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd throw that one at you, but I know that you've got your roots in the great state of Minneapolis. So I didn't pick somebody else. I picked him, but intentionally. But listen, man, one of the things that I appreciate with how you broke that down is there's a part of this that we can't run away from, and that's the impact, and there has been one, of women and the ascent of women in this conversation. I was saying on my show that I watched a WTTW public broadcasting piece on women in the airline industry, specifically as flight attendants / stewardesses, and their plight over the years, and then integrated into that was the civil rights movement and then the National Organization for Women. So that being said, Eamon, tell me, in your observation and with the folks that you are connected to and talk with, what do you think has been the impact of women on masculinity, or the perception or the definition of masculinity, let's say going back to the late 50s or the early 60s until now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's interesting about, and kind of how we can sort of frame it in our political climate today, with what we kind of seems like this collection of very resentful men, is that, and this is sort of the maybe thesis of Richard Reeves' book of Boys of Men, is that, feminism recast the lives of women in America. It fundamentally broadens someone's vision, a woman's vision of what her life outcome could be. Reeves calls it one of the greatest economic liberations in human history. I think, just broadly speaking, it is an amazing achievements that we can applaud. I think what is kind of interesting, or makes this sort of a fraught topic, is that, and this is something that Susan Faludi talks about in her book, is that at the same time that we see women being more, starting to be for the first time included in higher education in the workplace, that coincided with deindustrialization of America and the sort of thinning out of probably the biggest sector of the economy that employed men, and that, the key part of this was not just men, but that employed working class men and provided them a sort of means to the middle class that we just don't have anymore. And our economy was more based on a sort of one family, what they call the sort of Fordist family wage, where like one male factory worker could support a family based, with a unionized job, could support a family. So what we sort of saw all at the same time was, women entering the workplace, women no longer, for very good reason, not needing to rely on men for support. It was often a very, very raw deal that women were getting, being housewives doing the sort of second shift in the house. And we saw that at the same time as men were losing their footing in the economy, and broadly speaking, more working class men and black men, especially, as we saw. And it was like a lot of the issues that Richard Reeves is writing about in his book, that men are falling, quote unquote, falling behind women in certain categories. It is felt much more acutely the lower you go on the economic and kind of racial hierarchy. Black and Latino men are suffering from these issues in education and the workplace far more than, white men and middle-class men are. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's sort of this interesting period that you can track the sort of changes in the American economy, and we can kind of see how that has a cultural outcome where men's lives have not been recast in a sort of constructive enough way.
Yeah.
And we haven't been able to sort of like, I think, be sort of integrated and sort of evolve past that sort of provider archetype that we saw in a sort of, a completely different economy.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about it. You touched on it, and I'll take the hard pill on this. Guys, part of men's definition of masculinity, I would say at large, is that if, in terms of, to your point about that sort of retro feel, is that if I'm not the sole provider, and this is not for all men and all communities, and certainly not all economic groups, but if I'm not the sole provider, then I'm not a man. And if my wife is not at home kicking out babies, I'm not a man. And that's something that I think those two things right there, if I'm not the provider and my wife's not home barefoot and pregnant, which is going back decades of mindset, then I'm not a man. I'm not masculine. And that's carried forward. And there's a lot of to your original point about sort of this younger, vulnerable group of young guys that are starting to be made to feel like that I should be the sole breadwinner. I should be in charge. My girlfriend, my wife should be the one that's taking care of the children. And there's this fight right now that's not where we're headed. And we're headed in a direction that we've been heading for a while. But this sort of this hyper masculinity and these other descriptive words are saying that if you don't buy into that, then you're not a real guy. And it's a weird, when they say make America great again, that's one of the parts that we didn't, I don't think, define. Is part of that is to go back to where men said this is the way that it is. We talked around it, I think, politically these last couple of years, but we really didn't hear voices saying this is really about men, predominantly white men, going back to that 50s, post-World War II, leading into not Vietnam, but the Korean War. We're the men. We're in charge. We're the breadwinners. You stay at home and kick out babies. And that's not where we are right now. And the struggle is they feel that unless we go back to that we've lost our manhood, we've lost our masculinity. I'm not a believer in that at all. I'm proud to say my father told me years ago, have strong women around you, it'll make you a stronger man. And he was right on point.
Yeah, and a lot of, with young men, and I think it's important to highlight, we did see a very startling shift of young men towards Trump in the 2024 election, when previously they were much more, young people broadly can be more relied on to be loyal Democratic voters. But in some of this data that we're seeing, men, 70, I saw a figure yesterday that was 75-year-old white men were more likely to vote for Biden than 20-year-old white men.
I know.
In the last election.
Isn't that crazy? So, and it's crazy in a good way, though. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Eamon.
Oh, yeah. No. I was just going to say that I think, I don't think this is entirely a conversation about what men are doing online. I think sometimes that can be sort of overstated in these postmortems, but I do think it is pretty important, especially for young men, especially for this generation that had their sort of adolescent socialization interrupted by the pandemic and spent a lot of time online. And I just highlight this report from the Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice that they took a 2023 survey of 2,000 men aged 18 to 45. And half of those men said their online life is more meaningful than their offline life. And 1/3 of the young men in that study spent no time in person with someone outside their household in the prior week. 2/3 of all of those men felt that they agreed with the statement, quote, "No one really knows me." And so there is a sort of deep social insecurity and kind of driftlessness that a lot of men are feeling, and they're finding a sort of salve to that isolation by going on the internet and, getting shunted by algorithms towards content that is, I think, personally makes those, can make their conditions a lot worse. Mm-hmm. But I do also think it's helpful that to state, and this is what I wrote about in my Mother Jones story, is that a lot of these influencers are really giving young men practical self-help that they can actually use in their lives, but then it's layered on with this very misogynistic worldview. But a lot of the content online and the spaces that young men are in have been sort of infected by this, quote unquote, manosphere culture. And I think it's going to take a lot of work to kind of undo that.
Yeah. Our board engineer, Henry, is sitting here nodding his head like, yep, he knows it firsthand from a lot of his colleagues and cohorts. He's in that late 20s age group that sees it real time. So he's a validator of what you and I, as slightly older cats, are talking about. Listen, man, you've been great to have on today. And this is an ongoing conversation because of the impact that it's had on our most recent election. The numbers are there to point out that this is something we can't, if we're trying to move the needle in a better direction, then we have to talk about this and identify it and talk about it some more. So, Eamon, I really appreciate you being with us and on the show today. Let our listeners know how they can find and follow you and kind of, do the job of learning more from what you're writing.
Yeah, so you can read most of my recent writing is either at thenation.com or motherjones.com. And then it's my story that you mentioned, our Men OK profile of Richard Reeves, who's the sort of trying to be a kind of calm, sort of center-left voice in this debate about men, or this conversation about men. My profile of him is available, and like you said, the new issue of the print issue of The Nation magazine. I also have a Substack where I don't write frequently, but that'll be sort of where I post my writing as I start to kind of freelance for more outlets. So EAMONWHALEN.substack.com. My Twitter handle is my first and last name, so people can find me there. But yeah, thank you so much for having me for the thought-provoking conversation. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We will have you back because this isn't going, to your point, this isn't going away. And it's one of the things that we need to stay leaning into to work toward a better direction. So, Eamon, thanks for being with us. I can hear your laughter. Like, that wasn't a snarky laugh. That was we got to lean into this. So
absolutely. Yep.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, have a great day.
This is Tony Moray. I'm an estate planning lawyer who drafts living trusts and wills. Since the election, I've been hearing from my clients, many of them fellow WCPT listeners. And we all wonder, how did this happen and what can we do? The how is, of course, very complicated. My thoughts as regard to what we can do is simple but important. We need to take extra care of those we love. Having an estate plan using either a living trust or will can provide comfort in uncertain times like these. When the progressive values we hold dear are under attack, I feel we must make sure that our personal lives are secure and then work out from there. I've been drafting estate plans for my clients for over 30 years, and I will use all of that experience to help you. Please call me at 847-996-0496. My website is moreylawoffice.com. That's Morey spelled M-O-R-E-E. Again, the phone is 847-996-0496. There is no cost or obligation for our initial discussion. I look forward to speaking with you.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago weather update.
From the Weatherology Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki. A few spotty snow showers here early today. Otherwise, skies will become mostly sunny. Highs around 40 degrees, and it'll be breezy. Northwest winds of 15 to 25 miles per hour, gusting as high as 40. Tonight, mostly clear, low near 30. By Friday, increasing cloud cover, high 57 degrees. Saturday, mostly sunny skies with a high around 44. That's your latest Chicago weather update.
Currently, it's 33.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Welcome back to Choose Views with Richard Chew on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hey, Progressives, welcome back to Choose Views. What a great opportunity to talk with Eamon Whalen, who digs into this conversation about Are Men Okay? And we didn't get in too deep into the article. I'd rather have you go read that at The Nation. He does great work with Mother Jones as well, but check him out. And it's a topic that's relevant to where we are in our national politics, because a lot of people voted for Trump because they wanted to vote for the dude that represented this sort of masculinity He-Man BS. And so you heard the interview, and we can certainly talk about that more, and I'll definitely have Eamon back with us in the future. Talking about another guy that kind of knows what it's like to be literally on the battlefield and literally being masculine, but more importantly, being an American that supports our veterans and makes sure that he does the real work so that our veterans are taken care of and our veterans are recognized. We had the opportunity to have with us this morning Mike Williams. And who is Mike Williams? Well, Mike Williams is a battle-tested medic, lifelong musician, and has lots of frontline experience. Why is that important and relevant right now? There's a topic. First of all, y'all know our veterans are being mistreated by this administration, and I'm tired of it. My good friend and colleague and cousin Eric Grant on the family meeting talks about this and has for years. If there's one group of people that sure as hell should be treated better, it's our veterans. And Eric ain't fought in no wars. He's never been in the military. Neither have I. I mean, we're military adjacent with family members. But Eric is hardcore about the disrespect that our veterans have received over the years. And so that's why having Mike with us this morning is great, and it's an honor to bring on to the show Mike Williams. Welcome to the show, Mike. How are you doing this morning, man?
Doing good. Richard, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mike's out in California, you guys. So, but he told me yesterday, he said, Richard, don't worry. I get up early, got to take care of the dog, got to get out and going. And that military training hasn't really gone away. So getting up before the crack of dawn, 0 dark 30 hours, as we call it. Right, Mike?
Right.
Absolutely. Mike, take a moment. Let our listeners and viewers know a little bit about you and your background, and then I want to get into a very specific topic as it relates to veterans and some things that you're doing to support our men and women throughout the country. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been playing and writing music since I was 7 years old. So being that I'm only 21, so that's a joke, right? So I've been doing this for over 50 years now. In my early 20s. I was in college, and it was right before the first Gulf War. My best friend, since I was 6 years old, he was in a special operations unit, and he was on standby to deploy. And it was just really bothering me. So I walked out of my biophysics lab, went over and I signed up, and I ended up going through my training and deploying overseas. His unit never mobilized. That's no fault of his. It's just kind of how it works. And when you sign up as a combat medic and we're going into war, there's a pretty good chance you're going to deploy. So once I got back from serving for 10 years, multiple deployments, that's where I started going through the process of just unpacking the real deep emotions behind, what I'd seen, and through that experience, looking at my veteran brothers and sisters and seeing what they're going through. And this is a way that I can help express, I believe, a common truth that we're going through.
So right now, Mike, you've got a very specific mission that you're fighting hard for. And that's about the incredible amount of angst, pain, anguish, and just total disrespect that's being thrown at veterans, specifically when it comes to veteran debt. So let's talk about that for a minute and explain what you're doing, what's happening, and then what you're doing to affect this in a positive way.
So veteran debt is something, building the picture for you. It starts with, from the time you get out of the military, I don't think there's any veteran that is ever in a situation that says, boy, golly, what am I going to do with all the money I made while I was serving? But that's not the point of why we serve, Richard. We serve because there is a heartfelt desire behind protecting this country, or in my case, it was, I wanted to back up my best friend, and through the process, I really learned the amount of commitment that I had for wanting to do good for the country.
So one of the things with veteran debt that I'm learning and come across is that there's so much, to your point about when you come out, there's not these stacks of money that are sitting there waiting for you. You served, you're active duty, and you served to protect the country, to protect our belief systems, that which we've had for such a long time, and in your case, being there for your buddy. But when folks come out, their opportunities may be limited, and I guess you could say the vultures hit quickly with different types of loans, different types of things to buy, and it's all based on debt. So talk a little bit about that part of leaving the military, coming to not non-active life, and what that represents as a veteran and how you get approached.
I find it a very common thing when I talk with other veterans. When we get out, we have to immediately reinvent ourselves. Most of us have families. We have commitments that we need to make sure we're paying for. So when I got out as a combat medic, I was offered, well, congratulations, you can become a paramedic and work for the fire department, or you could go to a hospital and work in the emergency room. And after 10 years, Richard, I was so burned out on life and death. I couldn't do that. I chose not to do that. So you reinvent yourself immediately. And this is where most of us end up in menial jobs, just trying to pay the bills. And in my case, going back to school, refocusing into an IT career that I did for 25 years, going on from there now. You have the debt from the education, and you have the debt from just trying to make sure you're paying the mortgage. And that's where people end up in trouble. And I'll share with you about Michael Thorne later.
Yeah. So tell me this, in this current environment, we have a administration that is not respecting veterans, ran on taking care of veterans, ran on, let's protect our troops, let's honor our troops. But in current real-time action through these executive orders, and we had a gentleman on last week that spoke about the fact that Adam Mulvey talked about the fact that he's working at the vet in northern Illinois, North Chicago, and they, literally took away this hard-earned opportunity and career. He did reinvent himself, and he was able to then get back and support veterans. How do you feel? How do guys and men and women that you talk with about how the administration is treating veterans at large right now?
Dude, I'd be careful about one thing here. You say current administration. And what I see it took me 23 years to finally go back to the VA and look at the benefits, because I'm coming up on another surgery that I'm going to need based on injuries I received in the military. Previously, it was a slow drip effect where I would be talking with veterans and they'd be saying, yeah, that's interesting. This one service that was really great, it's no longer available. And I would hear that story over and over again. It was a slow drip. I believe what we're seeing right now is a much more aggressive approach to that. But I take it back to, it is true that veterans we're hurting, but if the picture is doing that to save the taxpayers' money, I have to be fair about both sides.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, and that's why the drip. And I appreciate you saying that for clarification. There has been a for lack of better words, treatment of veterans for a long time. It didn't start with the current Trump administration. It's been there for a long time on both sides of the political aisle. That's just a fact. And I think today, or in the current environment that we're in, to your point, it's accelerated. And the acceleration is what's gotten so many people, frankly, that weren't paying attention to it, the drip. The acceleration, I think, is what has gotten people so, attentive or concerned, because we haven't seen it like this before. Are you right now with the work that you're doing and Forgive the Veteran Debt and helping to prevent veteran suicide? What are some of the things that you're seeing, and what are some of the I guess you could say, calls to action that you're advocating for?
I want to give one example, and I have permission from this veteran to do this. Working with End Veteran Debt, I'll be talking about two organizations, End Veteran Debt and the Harmonetics Project. End Veteran Debt addresses the debt and the challenges behind that. The Harmonetics Project, we're addressing the suicidal ideation that often accompanies staggering debt for the veterans.
And so,
Michael Thorne.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
No, you go. I didn't mean to slip in there. Go ahead.
Michael Thorne is a person, is a veteran that I met through the End Veteran Debt organization. He was a combat medic as I was, and then when he got out, he became a paramedic. What he didn't realize from his tour in Iraq, the burn pits destroyed his lungs, but the burn pits, it's a creeping challenge, because when you first get out, you're still doing okay, and over time, your lung tissue it starts breaking down just from the toxins. That happened to him, and when he found working as a paramedic that he was just about passing out, trying to run up a couple of steps, he knew he was in trouble. He went back to the VA. He went back to the VA multiple times, and there's a lot of red tape there. And in the end, what happened is when you go to the VA as a veteran, what people don't realize is you're paying out of pocket. Unless you're 100% disabled, you're paying out of pocket on that. So he was keeping up with his VA medical bills, and there was a clerical mistake. And instead of the VA sending him the bill so he could pay it, they sent it to collections. By the time it got back to him, he lost his house. He lost just about everything. And he has a wife and 2 kids. And here's a guy that barely can take a few steps without collapsing.
Yeah.
And that's the place he was at. And my heart goes out to my brother here, because, my gosh, it's something he found End Veteran Debt. And through my work with the Harmonetics Project, I learned about his story. And that's where the song came from, The Price We Paid, that I put together.
Got it. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you, in keeping our segment on pace today, many people don't understand. I'll say this way: many everyday citizens don't understand the machinations of the military in general, but more specifically, the veteran, the transitions out of active duty to becoming a veteran, and it's a lifelong honor to become a veteran. But at the same time, it can be a lifelong burden if there are injuries, if there are illnesses and such. So help our audience understand some of the things that they can do, that we can do to help to make that situation a little bit better. What are some of the things that everyday folks can do to ease some of that pain and that trauma? What are some of the things that come to mind for you in that space?
Well, I'll point out when we transition, well, I'm going to give you a military experience. Your military time in service can be summed up in one single sentence. It is 99% monotony and 1% of pure insanity. So as we're coming out, and I looked at a metric recently that I still need to truth verify, but according to what I read, 1% of Americans serve in the military. So there is a disconnect there. The one thing I would ask, if you do see a veteran, you just show them some compassion, because the way that we see things as a veteran, the lens that we look through, we're always thinking in the back of our head, I need to be a normal human being. I don't need to take care of everything around me anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's a shift.
What transitional items do you think we could provide better as organizationally, and not just the federal government, but on a state level that can be done to help in that transition and to help that mindset of I don't have to be caring for or in charge of or taking care of everything? What do you think what are some of the tools that we can be better at providing?
Transition services through the federal as well as the state, as you're getting out to be able to transition. Now, I'll give you a Polaroid snapshot. In 1995, I just got back from Haiti. I was serving with 3rd Special Forces Group. Now, that doesn't make me a Green Beret. I worked in special operations. I was attached to Green Beret teams based on what I did. But it was interesting because when we got back to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, this guy came in, and he was a civilian. He was there to give us our transition briefing. And he was upset because he was late for lunch. So he walks in, and I believe these were his exact words. Well, what you need to understand is that you've changed and your family's changed. Figure it out. And he's walking out the door. We're all looking at each other, giving him the golf clap. It's like, okay, that's what we get to work with. Let's go.
Yeah. That's not particularly the most effective and useful way of helping folks who are in that transition. Mike, as always, I always have limited time to talk to guests that are wonderful and bring a great message. As we wrap up, help our audience understand how they can find you and reach out to you to lend support and find ways to get involved in some of the projects that you're involved in. How can folks find you?
There's 2 websites that I'll give you. The first one, and you can just Google this, End Veteran Debt. And that's endveterandebt.org is the website. And that's exactly what they're focused on, and they're doing a fantastic job. The ingenious thing is the person behind this was a financier on Wall Street. So he knows how to work the debt market and buy debt pennies on the dollar. Mm. So by supporting endveterandebt.org, you may be given $10, but on the debt market, that could be worth a significant amount more than that. To address the suicidal ideation, that's the project that I'm a part of, and it's called the Harmonetics Project. The website is www.theharmoneticsproject.org. I got to spell Harmonetics for you. It's HARMONETIKS. This was founded by Dr. Jeffrey C. Zimmerman, who is an Oriental medical doctor who's been developing this overall healing technique for the last 40 years. And I've been working as part of this team now for the last several years. And it simply allows us to align with the parasympathetic. The modern way we say this is the parasympathetic nervous system, or the nervous system that we can't control, like breathing and your digestion, and helping align the person just through simple breathing and movement to help unpack and deal with what veterans are carrying.
Yeah. Mike, thanks for being with us this morning. We will definitely have you back. As I say to so many of our wonderful guests, it's an ongoing conversation, and we're privileged to have you on the show to talk about something that a lot of people have their heads buried in the sand on. But Mike Williams, thanks for being with us this morning. Have a great day today, and hopefully you've got good weather in California, but we appreciate you being with us today.
A lot better than yours, and Richard. It's been an honor. Thank you, sir.
Be well. Thanks, Mike.
You take care.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Yeah, listen, I got a text from someone that said how sad that these courageous men and women join the armed forces with great humanitarian intentions, only to come out with such disadvantages. And that's true. And so, heavy subject, but we're strong folks here. We all are, those of us who are progressive liberal Democrats. And I appreciate what Mike said in terms of being careful about the indictment of now with regard to veteran treatment. It has been a slow drip. He's right about that. So I appreciate Mike saying that, and that's why I lean back into it to give it the credibility that it deserves in terms of his statement. But I also like what he said, Henry, about the acceleration that's taking place in the current administration, and he's right about that. So kudos to Mike in both of those spaces. And that's why we talk to people who are subject matter experts. They are living it. We're seeing it, but they're living it. And this is one of the things that we as progressive liberal Democrats owe, not just to our military men and women, our veterans, but we owe it to the folks like a Dr. Chick Canfora, because they're on the battlefield too. She literally was with regard to Kent State, but we owe it to them because they're speaking the truth. And as she said, they're fighting, Henry. You know, she was there, but she's still there. She's pushing her students, her journalism students, to use their voice. They have one, use it. And she's pushing us all to fight. So, you know, whether it be someone like her, or whether it be someone like Mike, or whether it be someone like Eamon, who we had on to talk about a critical issue, that, you know, masculinity, what is it? And how is it impacting how we get along, particularly in our political environment? You know, and he said it very well. And how, you know, what's the definition of masculinity, or frankly, what's the definition of strength? And I don't know if I have the answer to that. I know that I may have my less of a definition of what masculinity is. I'll lean more in the direction of what is strength. And I think that right now, the strength that we have to show as a party, as a group, as a country, you heard Dr. Canfora say this about the reason we have a big tent, as challenging as it is because it allows us to bring the voices in that need to be heard. And that's important. There's a difference between what I say, the big tent of voices that need to be heard, being heard, and as we've said so many times, you know, herding cats. At the same time, by comparison, I'd still rather be in our tent, speaking our voices as best we can, than being in a tent or a cult that doesn't speak out. And what's interesting about this is, and I've been wanting to lean into this for the bulk of the show, is you know, right now, two voices, Bernie and ALC, their voices are being heard. I mean, I read an article yesterday that over 51,000 people have RSVP'd on their upcoming event in Denver. 51,000 people have RSVP'd in this fight against the oligarchy. I mean, Dr. Canfora said it. Bernie was right in that space, and we all knew it. We didn't think that he wasn't right. It was a question of how we approached it. And I'm not trying to go back and revisit and relitigate the 2016 primary and all that. I'm not going to do that here. You guys can do that in your own space and so forth. But I think the real message is about taking our heads out of the sand on any of these issues, whether it be this concern about toxic masculinity and how it's impacting our political voices, whether it be what Mike talked about in terms of pulling our heads out of the sand when it comes to our veterans, and what Dr. Canfora said about fighting. We have to be willing to do that. We have to have the leadership that says we will fight. And she leaned into this, Henry. She said, listen, she talked about it with regard to her students. They have to be responsible for educating themselves in this space. And I've I've looked at the third rail of saying that a couple of times. And I've had a couple of people say, well, Richard, you can't blame the people. I've had some folks that we've had as guests on say, well, you can't blame the people. You got to create an environment for them to be welcomed when they decide to wake up. I don't fully agree with that. And one of our guests used the analogy of, the child touching the hot stove. You told them not to do it, but they did it anyway, so they learned. Well, versus preventing them from touching. No, if you tell them not to touch the hot stove and they do it, we're not into punishing anybody, but they have to learn and then come back and say, okay, let's get some things done. Taking their head out of the proverbial sand. We have to be, but at the same time, and this is what I always try to say about walking and chewing gum, as we fight and fight and fight and criticize and criticize and criticize, we still have to encourage our people, whether they be non-voters, active voters, and our leaders, that we can walk and chew gum. We have to push them to fight. We have to be critical of them when they don't get the things done that we need to get done. But at the same time, we have to be there to encourage them to move forward. And we have to let them know that we got their backs and we're here to support the work that they do. And I like seeing the fact that Bernie and AOC are getting out there doing it. And there's others that we hear about. Jasmine's certainly one, Representative Crockett's one, Representative Jamie Raskin, the list goes on. And that's part of what I want to see the Dems do. I mean, I've talked about this before. Doggone it, y'all show visual signs of connection and activity. Henry and I were joking around and enjoying some ensemble music. Show the ensemble of our leaders coming together from different factions and show that strength to the country. That's what has to happen. Be damned what the Republicans are doing. So, all right, guys, appreciate you being with us. And thanks to our guests today. They were fantastic. Look them up. And as always, take a deep breath, make your life count, and we will be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Question: where were you on May 3rd, 2005? If you were listening to the radio, you may have heard the first day on the air for WCPT. On Saturday, May 3rd, WCPT is celebrating 20 years on the air with a big live broadcast from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be at Max and Benny's restaurant in Northbrook, and WCPT listeners can attend this special 4-hour broadcast. Al Sparks will kick off the celebration with the WCPT broadcast team. Richard Chew, Joan Esposito, Patty Van